Have you ever thought the bridge to your own home was safe until the HOA slapped a no trespassing sign on it and demanded you pay a fee just to cross? They didn't know one thing. I don't just live at the end of that bridge. I own it, and when they put up that barricade, they didn't just block a path. They declared war. This is the story of a bridge, a grandfather's legacy, and an HOA that picked the worst possible man to mess with. My name is Cole Bennett, and if you think there's such a thing as rock bottom, let me be clear. Rock bottom is not fixed. Sometimes it's a trap set by the HOA, right on the land your ancestors left behind. It started 4 months ago. I lost my job at a cybersecurity firm in Denver, not for underperformance, but for telling the truth. The software I built uncovered a string of serious data leaks, and when I reported it, I wasn't promoted. I was blacklisted, blackballed, shut out of every project, every interview, every opportunity. And my wife? She said, "You may be honest, but I can't live off honesty." Then she walked out with a lawyer and a third of our bank account. I was left with almost nothing, except for one piece of land, small, worn down, but priceless. The old cabin by Cedar Lake that my grandfather, Frank Bennett, had lived in for over 40 years. He'd left it to me in his will. I never imagined I'd have to fall back on it, but when the city turned its back and my pockets ran dry, that cabin became my last lifeline. I stuffed what was left of my belongings into my low-slung SUV and headed toward the mountains. It felt like running away, but I told myself, this is a reset. Where Grandpa built a home with his bare hands, I'll rebuild my life. What I didn't know was that rebuilding wouldn't start with nature. It would start with a war against something more stubborn than wild bears. The Red Rock Hollow Homeowners Association. As I neared the cabin, the familiar dirt road wound through the trees just as I remembered. I passed the creek and approached the old wooden bridge, the one my grandfather always called the road back to freedom. But this time, the bridge didn't welcome me. It was blocked by a massive sign, blood red with bold white letters. Do not enter. Bridge is HOA common property, authorized. Personnel only. I slammed the brakes. My mind went blank, except for one word. What the hell? As I stepped out of the car to take a closer look, a woman emerged from the nearby path. She wore a worn navy blue blazer, thick glasses that made her eyes look like magnifying glasses, hair in a tight bun, and clutched a thick clipboard like a high school principal reborn. She didn't ask my name, didn't say hello. No pleasantries. She marched forward like she was leading a roll call. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice shrill like a smoke alarm. "I'm Geraldine Sparks, president of the Red Rock Hollow HOA. This bridge is community property. Your vehicle has no right to park here, and under no circumstances may you cross." I took a breath, trying to stay calm. "My name is Cole Bennett. I'm here to live at the cabin across the bridge. My grandfather, Frank Bennett, left it to me. Here's the deed and the property tax records." I held out my folder. She barely glanced at it before pulling out a violation form from her clipboard. "You're also in breach of Regulation 6.4C regarding flag display." I frowned. "Flag?" She pointed across the bridge to the cabin where I had hung a small American flag on a wooden post, just like Grandpa always did. Personal flags must not exceed a 2.1 ratio compared to the HOA flag. Yours is non-compliant. I looked again. Then, noticed the massive HOA banner at the neighborhood gate, big enough to cover a semi-truck. My flag was barely bigger than a newspaper. I clenched my fists, swallowing the rising anger. "Ms. Sparks," I said, my voice steady, "I never signed anything to join this so-called HOA. This is private property, and I have the legal documents to prove it." She smiled, a smirk honed from decades of handing out gum violations. "You'll be given instructions to register as a community resident. Every property owner is expected to comply with the neighborhood standards. And if you refuse, we have procedures." She tore off the citation and slapped it on my windshield, then turned and walked away, like she'd just won a court case. I looked at the bridge. I looked at the cabin beyond, the one that had been my warmest childhood refuge. And for some reason, in that moment, I heard Grandpa's voice in the back of my mind. To protect your land, son, sometimes you've got to tear down the fence they built wrong. I got back into the car, sat in silence, my heart pounding. No, this wasn't rock bottom yet, but I had just stepped into a fight. Not for survival, but for the bridge, for my name, and for justice, in honor of Frank Bennett. I didn't sleep that night. After Sparks slapped a violation notice on my windshield and strutted off like she'd just conquered Normandy, I parked my SUV on the side of the gravel road and walked across the bridge on foot. Every step on those wooden planks echoed memories. My grandfather and I hauling fishing rods, hammering in new railings, skipping rocks. But now, with that HOA sign glaring behind me, it felt like crossing into enemy territory. Inside the cabin, everything was still where my grandfather had left it. The old recliner by the window, the dusty rifle rack, the smell of pine wood, and pipe smoke. But the warmth I remembered was buried under a thick cloud of dread. I sat at the kitchen table with the violation notice in one hand and a thick packet Sparks had thrust into the other before she left. Community Compliance Orientation. Packet, the cover read. It was thicker than the manual that came with my Jeep. I opened it. First page, mission statement. To foster unity, order, and aesthetic excellence for all residents of Red Rock Hollow. Sounds harmless, until you hit page 200. There were regulations on mailbox height, 36 to 42 inches, measured not from ground, but from the base of the post to the bottom of the mailbox opening. Acceptable lawn grass species, no wildflowers, only HOA-approved hybrids. Even the angle your car must be parked in the driveway, parallel to property line, plus and 5 degrees allowed. They had rules for everything: porch light wattage, garden gnome, height, the color of seasonal wreaths, and there it was, in bold. No property owner may utilize community infrastructure, including bridges, trails, or service roads, without expressed approval from the Red Rock Hollow Board of Directors. I set the packet down and rubbed my temples. I wasn't just dealing with nosy neighbors. This was a regime, and they were treating me like a trespasser on my own damn land. But what rattled me even more wasn't what I read. It was what I felt. Like I was being watched. At 11:17 p.m., I spotted headlights creeping along the far side of the lake road. Same car twice that evening. I peeked out. The vehicle was gone, no sound, no taillights. Just the unsettling sense of being monitored. At 6:03 a.m. the next morning, I opened my cabin door and found another citation pinned to the frame. Violation 2A. Improper mailbox height. I grabbed a tape measure, 36 inches exactly. Then I reread the packet. They didn't measure to the top of the box. They measured to the bottom edge of the opening, from the base of the post, not the soil. According to their math, I was 2 inches short. I spent the next 20 minutes digging, under the post, adding gravel and adjusting the entire setup like I was trying to appease a vengeful spirit. When I finished, I turned around, and there she was, Geraldine Sparks, standing at the edge of the road, clipboard in hand, watching me. "Better," she said, scribbling something down. "Though your vehicle is still parked at an improper angle," I blinked. "My vehicle is parked straight." "Your driveway isn't," she replied, pulling out a damn measuring protractor. "The incline violates HOA Standard 8.1. Vehicles must be aligned within 5 degrees of the primary lot line." She handed me another ticket. I took it without a word, my hands shaking not from rage, but disbelief. This wasn't law. It was harassment dressed in bureaucracy, and it didn't stop there. Over the next 10 days, I received 7 more citations. Non-compliant garden gnome, too whimsical for neighborhood aesthetic. Porch light brightness, excessive lumens after dusk. Unauthorized plant species in the flower bed, wildflowers, planted by my grandfather in 1993. A flag that was too large, again. Trash bin visibility from the main road. Lack of proportional shrub symmetry. Each citation came with a fine, $50 to $200. Total, $1,950. Gone, just like that. And every single violation was hand-delivered by Sparks, who treated the process like she was grading pop quizzes. "I don't make the rules, Mr. Bennett," she'd say. "I taught civics for 22 years. I understand how order works." But it wasn't the order she was pushing. It was control. And I knew it deep in my gut. I tried reasoning with her once. I pointed out that her own front yard had wind chimes clearly marked as non-compliant in the handbook. Her expression didn't even flinch. "Mr. Bennett, I am the HOA president. I think I know which rules apply to whom." That night, I stopped caring about the fines. What got under my skin was her tone, that condescending teacher voice like I was some slow-witted kid who couldn't understand basic structure and compliance. I was being infantilized, not fined. And every piece of paper she pinned to my door was a reminder that I wasn't seen as a man. I was being made an example of. The neighborhood wasn't silent either. Curtains twitched when I walked outside. The same jogger passed by my house every afternoon at 3:16 like clockwork, always when I was doing yard work. It felt orchestrated, manufactured. So I fought back the only way I could at the time. I started reading. HOA law, property rights, legal precedents, amendment rules, voting quorums, the rules behind the rules. That's when I noticed something interesting. One of the citations, the one about non-standard decorative elements, referenced a Section 15 FC. When I cross-referenced it with the original HOA documents, available from the county clerk's site, I found something odd. Section 15 FC used to only prohibit offensive or vulgar yard displays, but this new citation claimed any decoration not pre-approved was a violation. That wasn't law. That was an amendment. And guess what? By their own charter, any amendment required a 30-day notice and a community-wide vote. Neither happened. I called a few neighbors. Most had no idea there were changes. Some didn't even know the rule book had a 15 FC. Suddenly, I wasn't just some guy being targeted. I was staring at the foundation of a paper dictatorship, and it was cracked. I decided it was time to stop playing by their playbook. It was time to write my own. I didn't sleep that night either. This time it wasn't fear or stress or anxiety that kept me up. It was anger. White-hot, slow-burning anger. The kind that doesn't explode but simmers deep in your chest. The kind that sharpens your focus. Frank's betrayal stung more than I wanted to admit. For a brief moment, I had believed he was someone I could trust. A reasonable man in an unreasonable system. But now I saw it clearly. Frank wasn't neutral. He was a tool, a mouthpiece for Sparks, a friendly face used to lull people into thinking compliance was a choice, when in fact it was the only option ever offered. I stood at the kitchen sink around 2 a.m., looking out over the lake, sipping cold coffee. The moonlight glinted off the water. The bridge stretched out from the shoreline like a silver ribbon, quiet, sturdy, unwavering, just like my grandfather had been. That bridge had always been there, always. I'd walked across it as a boy, barefoot in the summer, dragging a tackle box and whistling off-key. I remembered him once saying, "This bridge, it doesn't just lead home, Cole, it is home." I stared at it now, suddenly seeing it differently. Why did Sparks think she could block it? Why did she assume it belonged to the HOA? Something didn't add up. I made a decision. First thing the next morning, I drove into town and headed straight to the county clerk's office. The woman at the front desk gave me a skeptical look when I asked for property archives. I told her I was looking for records on a private structure, a bridge, possibly dated back to the 1960s. She raised an eyebrow, then pointed toward a small side office. Ask for Curtis Myers. He's been here since the Stone Age. I walked in and found a wiry old man with Coke bottle glasses, a bolo tie, and a nameplate that read, Deputy Clerk, Curtis Myers. You said Bennett? He asked, eyes lighting up. Frank Bennett's grandson? That's right, he leaned back in his chair and whistled. Your granddad was one of the most meticulous men I've ever met. Paid every tax bill on the dot, down to the cent. I need to know about the bridge, I said. The one crossing the outlet to the lake. Sparks is saying it's community property, but I don't think that's right. He nodded slowly, then stood and disappeared into the back room. 10 minutes later, he returned holding a weathered olive green file folder. Thought you might come asking someday, he said. Your grandpa kept this office busier than any man with just one cabin ever had the right to. Inside the folder were gold, survey maps from 1959 handwritten letters to the county permits for private bridge construction, structural drawings with blue pencil markings A. Stamped approval dated April 1960 and the kicker. A series of receipts for annual bridge taxes, paid from 1961 to last year. He handed me one receipt in particular. The name Morrison Bridge Tax ID, 4471, was printed at the top. The payer. Frank Bennett, now me. I sat down, hard. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath. This bridge isn't community property, I said aloud. Curtis nodded. It never was. Your grandpa paid to build it himself. Steel and treated lumber. Best you could get back then. He didn't want to depend on any committee to reach his land. That line hit me straight in the chest. He didn't want to depend on any committee to reach his land. He knew. He saw them coming, maybe not Sparks by name, but the whole mentality. The creeping mindset that says you may own the land, but we own the rules. Curtis reached across the desk and patted the folder. He built that bridge to last 100 years, and legally, it's yours. All of it. I spent the next 2 hours at a coffee shop with my laptop and the documents spread out across 2 tables. I called Lena Brooks, the paralegal who'd spoken to me after the board meeting, and asked her to meet me. She arrived in a hoodie and jeans, hair tied back, legal pad already in hand. I handed her the folder. She didn't say a word for a full 5 minutes. Then she looked up, eyes wide. Cole, this is a smoking gun. You own that bridge. You have permits, payments, tax history, and original documentation. The HOA has no authority to touch it. I nodded. They barricaded it 2 weeks ago. Said it was for safety inspections. Left me hiking miles through the woods for groceries. Lena's expression hardened. They committed civil trespass, possibly criminal mischief. We spent the next hour cataloging everything. Scanning documents, photographing receipts, logging tax codes and ordinance references. Lena practically buzzed with energy. She wasn't just helping. She was arming me, and me. I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Solid ground. Not just metaphorically, legally. I left that cafe with a plan. Sparks thought I was a loner. She thought I was broke, outmatched, and outmaneuvered. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that my grandfather didn't just leave me a cabin. He left me a weapon, a paper trail with the precision of a SEAL team, and I was about to use it. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I wasn't after revenge. I was after recognition. Recognition that for weeks I'd been lied to, fined, harassed, surveilled, and finally cut off from my own home. All by a woman with a clipboard and a God complex. But that night, I wasn't walking into a meeting as a man with complaints. I was walking in as the legal owner of the only bridge in and out of Red Rock Hollow. And I had the receipts to prove it. The emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the same rec center. But when I arrived at 6:30, the parking lot was already overflowing. News had spread, not just about me, about the bridge. The air buzzed with nervous energy. You could hear it in the half-hushed whispers, feel it in the sideways glances. The community had smelled blood in the water, but they didn't know whose it was going to be. I wore a plain black jacket, jeans, and boots, still dusted from the hike earlier that week, no speech prepared. Just a folder under my arm, and Lena. Brooks walking beside me, carrying her own thick stack of documents. Inside, it was standing room only. Residents lined the walls. Some looked angry, some looked worried, and a few, just a few, looked hopeful. At the front table, Geraldine Sparks sat flanked by her loyal lieutenants. Frank Delaney avoided my eyes, and next to them was someone. New, a tall man in a dark suit, expensive haircut, no-nonsense expression. The HOA had lawyered up. Good. Sparks opened the meeting like always. Same cold, clinical voice. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight to address certain claims made by Mr. Cole Bennett regarding the ownership and status of the Cedar Creek Bridge. She paused, letting the room soak it in. And to reaffirm the board's commitment to community safety, transparency, and legal compliance. I almost laughed. Transparency? From a board that amended its bylaws without a vote? But I let her finish. Then I stood. I'd like to speak. She hesitated. The lawyer whispered something. Then she nodded. Proceed, Mr. Bennett, but keep it civil. I walked to the front, laid my folder on the table, and opened it like a magician flipping over the final card in a rigged game. First, I handed out copies of the original county permit, dated 1960, stamped, signed, and irrefutable. Then came the tax records. 60 years of bridge payments made by my grandfather, then by me. Next, the letters of correspondence between Frank Bennett and the county, describing the bridge's dimensions, ownership, and maintenance responsibilities. This isn't just paperwork, I said, voice steady. This is proof. Proof that the bridge doesn't belong to the community, doesn't belong to the HOA, it belongs to me. There were gasps. Some audible, some under breath. The lawyer leaned forward, studying the seal on the county document. Sparks sat frozen, her pen hovering in midair like someone had just unplugged her. This is not a legal threat, I continued. It's a legal fact. For 60 years, my family has paid for, maintained, and legally possessed the only bridge into this community. And 2 weeks ago, this board barricaded it without permission, isolated me, and cost me contracts, interviews, and basic access to life. I turned toward the room, away from the board. This isn't about rules anymore. It's about respect, property rights, and what happens when authority goes unchecked. The lawyer stood up slowly, clearing his throat. These documents appear to be authentic, he admitted. However, we may need to review potential easement implications. That's when Curtis Myers, the county clerk himself, stood up from the back row. I'd called him that morning. Ladies and gentlemen, Curtis said, his voice calm but resonant. I've known the Bennett family since 1958. I've processed every one of those bridge tax payments. There is no easement. There is no shared ownership. The bridge is private. Period. Silence. Even Frank Delaney looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under him. Geraldine Sparks adjusted her glasses but said nothing. It was Lena who spoke next. By barricading Mr. Bennett's bridge, the HOA has potentially committed civil trespass and unlawful interference with private property. And if we're talking damages, the numbers could get very uncomfortable for everyone involved. I could feel the shift, the weight in the room tipping. Some residents looked stunned, others are ashamed. One elderly woman whispered, "He was right." But what surprised me most was Sparks. She didn't fight back. She sat still, hands clasped, face pale. For just a second, barely a flicker, I saw something behind those thick glasses. Not defeat. Not even fear. Regret. and I realized something I didn't expect. Sparks had once lost a battle like this before, years ago. Curtis had hinted at it. Maybe she'd built this ironclad system of rules not just for power, but because she was afraid of losing it again. Still, fear doesn't justify oppression, and she was about to learn what real accountability looked like. I gave the community 48 hours to respond before I took further action, and this time, I wasn't bluffing. 2 days. That's how long I gave them. 48 hours to process the truth, to acknowledge the damage they caused, and to respond like adults instead of bureaucrats. And sure enough, by Saturday morning, I had 3 new voicemails, all with the same message in different flavors. Let's talk. But this time, I was the one setting the tone. I met Geraldine Sparks at a small diner just outside town, neutral territory. She didn't bring her clipboard. She didn't bring her lawyer. And for the first time since the day she blocked my bridge, she didn't bring her arrogance either. She wore a beige cardigan and looked 10 years older than usual. Maybe it was the lighting, or maybe it was what losing power does to someone who lived off it. Cole, she said, using my first name for the first time. I think we both want what's best for this community. I nodded slowly. That's good, because here's what it's going to take for me to let it keep crossing my bridge. I placed a piece of paper between us, 5 terms, no negotiation, all fines against me rescinded, retroactively. Every bogus citation wiped off the books. Full reimbursement, $4,200 for fines already paid, a public apology video from Geraldine herself to be shared with the Red Rock Hollow community. Freedom Week, an annual week where minor infractions are ignored, reminding residents that rules serve people, not the other way around. A formal easement agreement, granting the community continued use of the bridge, in exchange for a one-time payment of $25,000 for damages, legal costs, and pain endured. Sparks stared at the list for a long time. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee. These are excessive, she said. They're fair, I replied. They're a lesson. The same kind you've been handing out for years. You shut down my life for 2 weeks. You owe me this. But more importantly, you owe this community a reality check. She looked away. Think about it, I said. You have until Monday, and I walked out. By Monday morning, the HOA had called an emergency vote. The residents of Red Rock Hollow, many of whom had sat silently during my abuse, were finally stirred by something they understood. Liability. Turns out when you tell folks that they've been trespassing on private property for decades, they listen, especially when they realize the bridge they use every day could be padlocked at any moment. By Monday afternoon, Sparks left a message on my phone. We accept. That evening, I received the official agreement, signed by the board. The money would come from the HOA reserve fund and the rest through a temporary special assessment. And the apology? It aired that same night. It was shaky, awkward, and shot in what looked like her guest room. But she did it. She admitted that the HOA had overstepped, that due diligence was neglected, and that residents should never be made to fear retaliation for questioning authority. She even wiped her glasses twice during the video. Whether it was real emotion or dust from the camera flash, I didn't care. It was enough. And the community? Something shifted. People started talking again. Not just behind curtains, but openly. During the next board meeting, 2 new residents raised concerns about outdated bylaws. One man who'd lived there for 20 years said, I always thought it was just easier to go along, but after what happened to Cole, I think we've been asleep too long. Freedom Week was scheduled for July, and for the first time in HOA history, a lawn flamingo wasn't sighted. The bridge stayed open. The rope gate stayed down. But the nod? That stayed too. Every time someone crossed it, they looked up, met my eyes, and gave a small, respectful nod. No more, no less. And that was enough. It meant, we get it now. As for me, I used part of the settlement money to fix the cabin up. New roof, reinforced dock. I even turned the attic, the one where I found my grandfather's documents, into a proper office, fitting considering what came next. Turns out when you stand up to a corrupt HOA and win, people notice. Word spread. I started getting calls, emails, messages from people in other towns, other communities. My HOA's been fining me for grilling on Sundays. Can you help? They're threatening to tow my truck because it doesn't match my house color. I need someone who knows how to fight back. So I launched something new, a consulting service, small, focused, personal, helping folks defend their property rights, one battle at a time. I called it Bridgeline Legal Consulting, because sometimes the only thing between you and injustice is a bridge someone tried to steal. Victory is a strange thing. At first, it felt like relief, then pride, then clarity. But after that, it starts to feel like responsibility. I hadn't set out to become anything more than a man reclaiming his right to live in peace. But after I won, after I made the HOA apologize, refund me, and pay for the right to keep using my bridge, something changed. The story didn't stay in Red Rock Hollow. It started small. A Facebook post in a local homeowners group, a screenshot of the apology video someone uploaded to YouTube, then a Reddit thread, a podcast, and before I knew it, my inbox was full. My HOA banned me from putting a flag on my porch. Can they do that? They fined my father for parking his pickup truck in the driveway. He's 82. I just got hit with $3,000 in violations and don't even know why. Different people, different states, but the same voice behind every message. Someone finally had enough, and they were asking me for help. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I tell everyone that right up front. But I'd done the work. I'd read the covenants. I'd lived through the intimidation, the manipulation, the rules that move. And more importantly, I'd beaten them at their own game. So I leaned in. I called it Bridgeline Legal Consulting, named after the very fight that had forced me into all this. Not a flashy firm. Just me, Lena Brooks, who quickly became my full-time partner, and a laptop. Our mission: empower homeowners, expose abuse, defend what's yours. And people listened. The first case was a man in Arizona, retired Navy, fined for putting solar panels on his roof. His HOA claimed it violated community uniformity. What they didn't mention? Arizona state law overrides HOA rules when it comes to solar access rights. We helped him write the appeal. We walked him through the enforcement statute. They backed down within a week. Next came a woman in Georgia. She lived alone. The HOA had sent her letters claiming her mailbox paint was faded. They demanded she hire a specific contractor, a guy with ties to the HOA president. We exposed it as a conflict of interest, got the fines waived, then helped her gather support to run for the board herself. One by one, people started standing up, and we were right there behind them. Lena called it a quiet insurrection. I called it justice, catching its breath. The stories varied, but the patterns were the same. Confusing rules, arbitrary enforcement retaliation, when challenged, a sense of helplessness cloaked in faux professionalism. But what these HOA boards weren't counting on was someone like me showing up in their inboxes with the paperwork, the proof, and the precedent. Sometimes all it took was a certified letter. Other times, a well-worded demand. But most often, it was simply telling people, you're not crazy, you're not alone, and they're not untouchable. And meanwhile, back in Red Rock Hollow, things got quiet. Geraldine Sparks officially stepped down 3 months after the bridge meeting. No scandal, no speech. Just a resignation letter tucked into the HOA newsletter and a thank you for your service from the board. Her replacement. Frank Delaney, yeah, him. But here's the thing. Frank changed. Maybe it was a shame. Maybe it was the realization that power can swing both ways, or maybe he just saw which direction the wind was blowing. But he became a different kind of leader. Transparent, measured. He even invited me to sit in on the next round of bylaw revisions. I declined, not because I didn't care, but because my job was done there. That battle was over. It was time to help someone else fight theirs. One night I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a single sentence typed on plain white paper. Your grandfather would be proud. A neighbor, I don't know, who sent it, but I do know they were right because this wasn't just about HOA abuse anymore. It was about legacy. It was about proving that one man, when pushed far enough, can push back hard enough to shift the whole system. It was about the idea that freedom isn't granted in a newsletter. It's carved into the land, defended by paperwork. And sometimes by principle alone. And every time I stood on my bridge watching neighbors cross with a nod, a real one, not a forced gesture, I knew we'd changed something. Not everything, but enough. I knew it couldn't last forever. Change never comes without pushback. And I'd made just enough noise to rattle the right cages. It started with a letter. Not from a homeowner, but from an attorney. A partner at Wexler and Graham LLP, a firm I'd never heard of, but one that, according to Lena, represented over 24 HOA boards across 3 counties. The tone was polite. The intent? Anything but. Your involvement in matters of covenant enforcement, while noted, may constitute unauthorized legal representation under Colorado state law. Cease all advisory services immediately or face potential litigation. In other words, sit down, shut up, and go back to your bridge, but I didn't build a bridge line to bow. I forwarded the letter to Lena. She called me 15 minutes later, voice calm but clipped. They're scared. Good, I said. Means we're doing something right. They're also dangerous, she replied. You didn't just win one case, Cole. You're starting a movement, and movements make enemies. Within a week, it got worse. 3. Homeowners I was helping suddenly backed out. One cited family emergencies. Another said, the HOA and I have come to an understanding. But I knew what had happened. They'd been threatened. Not physically, but with citations, lawsuits, liens on their homes. One even showed me a photo. Someone had mailed him a printed screenshot of his Facebook messages with me. No return address. They weren't just coming after me now. They were coming after anyone who stood with me. So I did what my grandfather would have done. I doubled down. I released a public video. Just me standing on my bridge, wind in my jacket, and fire in my chest. If you've been fined for a flag, a fence, a flower pot, and you were told it's just the rules, I want you to hear me loud and clear. Rules don't override. Rights. Covenants don't cancel the Constitution. And no HOA can intimidate you into silence if you know how to stand. The video hit 10,000 views in a week, then 50,000. Then it made local news. That's when they hit back hard. A formal complaint was filed with the Colorado Bar Association, not against me, but against Lena, alleging unauthorized legal activity, conflict of interest, and professional misconduct. It was bogus. All of it. But it forced her to stop working cases while the review was pending. Bridgeline Legal was temporarily paralyzed. And I was furious. But I wasn't blind. This wasn't just one HOA retaliating. This was a coordinated effort. A silent network of board members, lawyers, and enablers who realized that one bridge had become a battleground, and one man had become a threat. They wanted to make an example out of me. But I had my own example to set. I called in every favor I had. Curtis Myers, the retired county clerk, helped me draft a public statement refuting the HOA's claims. Lena, though benched, advised me on every word off the record. And through a friend, I got in touch with a civil rights attorney named Andrea Tran, a legal pit bull with a resume full of courtroom victories and a zero-tolerance policy for bullies in suits. We filed a preemptive countersuit, not just in response to the threats, but to expose what was happening across the entire HOA system. Evidence, statements, patterns of abuse. Dozens of homeowners submitted sworn declarations. Bridgeline became the lightning rod, and Andrea became the conductor. Local news picked it up first, then regional. By month's end, we were in talks for a documentary, but behind all the noise, all the strategy, I kept going back to one thing: that bridge. It started as just a path across water. Then it became a wall they tried to build against me. And now, it was the symbol of something they couldn't control. A man who knew what he owned and refused to be ruled by fear. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, I stood there again, arms resting on the rail, wind in my ears. And I thought of every person who'd written to me. Every homeowner who whispered, "Thank you," even when they were too afraid to say it aloud. Every neighbor nodded instead of looking away. This wasn't over. It was just turning. They wanted me gone? Then they should have never let me find the attic. Never let me see the paperwork. Never made the mistake of turning my grandfather's bridge into their battleground. Because now, it was a war. The court hearing began on a gloomy Monday morning with no sun in sight, but I had never stepped into any place with such unwavering resolve. Across from me sat the attorney representing not just the Red Rock Hollow HOA, but also a network of other associations, people long used to no one daring to push back. And me? I was just a man in an old coat, walking into court with a briefcase filled with my grandfather's records, and a conviction that justice isn't something you can rewrite with violation notices. My attorney, Andrea Tran, was the first to stand. She didn't raise her voice, didn't slam the desk. She simply presented document after document, every tax receipt, deed, and record filed over the past 60 years. Not a single wasted word. Every statement was a precision strike. "This isn't just about a bridge," Andrea said, her eyes on the jury. "This is about the right to live without being strangled by those who rule by fear under the guise of community." And the other side? They scoffed. They threw out every argument in the book: customary usage rights, community management, collective benefit. But none of it held. Not against original deeds with county seals. Not against recordings of residents describing how they were threatened, silenced, and erased from meetings just for daring to ask, why? When it was my turn to speak, the courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. "I don't have a law degree," I began. "I haven't studied public policy. All I have is a bridge, a piece of land my grandfather left me, and one question: who truly owns your life? Us, or the rules no one ever got to rewrite?" One juror nodded. Just one. But to me, that was enough. The verdict came 3 days later. Red Rock Hollow HOA lost the case. Not only were they ordered to cover all legal expenses, the court also required them to amend their amendment process, limit the executive board's enforcement powers, and prohibit restrictions on private property unless backed by a 2/3 majority from residents. I didn't celebrate. I went home to the cabin, walked out to the bridge, and sat in the old wooden chair my grandfather once placed there. Lena came by carrying 2 cups of coffee. We didn't talk much. Just sat in silence, listening to the creek flow, as if everything was finally back in its rightful place. 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. I received a letter from local officials. They were inviting me to speak at a conference on private property rights and community governance. My story, from a wooden bridge to a courtroom, had become a case study. Not long after, 3 other neighborhoods in the next county asked me to speak as well. People started confronting their HOAs. They began demanding ballots, feedback, and accountability. And at Red Rock Hollow, a young woman named Maya, once fined by the HOA for letting her child hang paintings in the window, ran for president. She won. In her speech, Maya said, "We don't need fewer rules, we just need less fear." Now, whenever someone walks across that bridge, they still bow their heads slightly, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Freedom isn't given. It's defended by courage, by evidence, and by people who dare to say, "No, I'm no." Longer an unemployed man living off his grandfather's legacy. I am Cole Bennett, the man who held the bridge. And if one day someone knocks on your door with a citation book and says, "For the good of the community, you must comply," look them straight in the eye and say, "I am the community, and I know my rights."